Hey everybody, it is Patrick McLain, one of your guests for Reimagine 2020. I think we are on the third version now. I don't even know how this happened. Well, I kind of know how it happened. I was just telling the story. But first off, thank you everybody for your support. And I've always been shocked since we started this thing, how many, I think, kind of big people or people with some breadth or understanding of the market have really taken the time out of their day. And I think one benefit of, if we said there's any benefit to the COVID world or being at home or quarantine, it's that we get to talk to people maybe we wouldn't have otherwise, right? If it required a plane flight or booking a hotel room. So before I go on too long, I want to go ahead and let Erik introduce himself. First off, Erik, how's your day? Where are you at? And what's good? What good has happened to you this week? Tell me something exciting.
Yeah, well, I'm in Denver, Colorado. My week's going beautifully, and something good that happened to me this week. I don't know. I'm just getting overwhelmed with crypto innovation, and I was able to spend 5 hours a couple days ago just reading a bunch of tabs that I had open, and it was just nice to just really dig in and see how much things are growing and how diverse the ecosystem is getting, and I'm often just heads down in ShapeShift world, but when I get a chance to kind of see the tapestry of the industry, it's really inspiring. So that was really fun.
Well, so I have to ask on that. So what's inspiring you? What are the 2 things that are standing out in your brain?
Yeah, I think what's really inspiring to me right now is a lot of these decentralized exchanges, and the whole point of Bitcoin when it started was the ability to have a money that was not controlled by anyone and was borderless and could go anywhere and was just kind of this unstoppable force. And so around money, you've had all these different crypto services get built up, and one of which is the business of exchange generally. And exchanges have tended to be centralized, and there's sort of economic efficiency reasons for that. There's UX reasons for that, but the technology has gotten so good that now there are really good decentralized exchanges currently in operation. And what that means is it kind of extends the borderless, permissionless nature of Bitcoin as money into the activity of exchanging between different crypto assets. So that's I think really what's inspiring me right now.
And I'll have one last question on that, and I think a few things I want to ask you. But is the most exciting thing about decentralized exchanges to you is the fact that the central element is removed, that you feel like people have a little better odds at not getting corrupted or controlling what they're doing?
Yeah, I'm not one of those people that thinks everything can or should be decentralized, but many things should be, but it's hard to do. So exchange of one asset into another is one of those things that is best done in a decentralized way if possible. And it just hadn't been sufficiently good from a UX perspective or from a liquidity perspective until the last 6 or 12 months, and now it's really getting there. So that's awesome. These things can't get shut down, and they some of them are open source, so they're just building out quickly in many directions. They can't get turned off or corrupted in that way, and so that's awesome. It's the kind of thing I hoped would emerge, but hadn't for a while.
Definitely. Well, a ton to unpack there. But I think before we start going down that line, I think for the audience, so say there's a lot of college students, there's a lot of general kind of crypto enthusiasts. Maybe some of them know who you are, maybe some of them don't know who you are. I knew a little bit about who you were, to be honest, and then kind of leading up this interview, I made the time to listen to some of your talks and some of what you've written the last week or so. So actually, one question I want to ask is so I know it sounds like you got into Bitcoin around 2011, mm-hmm. But can you tell me leading up to that, and you go as far as you want, but is it you seem if I were to use some terms, correct if I'm wrong, libertarian, you really care about people's rights, almost like Rand Paul type Republican. And I'm going to stop putting words in your mouth in a second. But does this go back to you as a kid? Is it what were those things in your life that you think kind of led you up to that point of wanting to really adopt this space?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not really a fan of Rand Paul, but Ron Paul was certainly an inspiration to me years ago. Um, so I didn't even learn the term libertarian until college, but sort of was always of that mentality. Basically, it seemed fairly obvious to me that people should generally be left alone if they're not hurting others. That just seems like a good premise on which to build society. And you know, in college, I really started learning more about economics generally, and just it just became more and more clear that that governments are not capable of understanding something as complicated as an economy. It's a complex system that no one can really understand at all, and the hubris of people trying to control complex systems leads to many problems. So from a sort of practicality angle, I've never been in favor of central planning of complex systems like economies. And from a moral angle, which is maybe more important, I believe people should be left alone if they're not hurting each other. So it's not that I believe in people's rights. I believe in essentially one right. You know, the right to be left alone if you're not harming others. And from that, you know, I think you can logically construct a moral framework for most policies, and you know, not everything, but most things can be, I think, deduced down to like the concept of self-ownership. You own yourself, you own your property, and as long as you're respecting that rule of others, then that shouldn't be violated for you. So yeah, that kind of guides my viewpoint of the world, and certainly helped me see the value of Bitcoin, because you know, I did not like the fact that in the economy itself, the most important good of all is money. And the fact that that is controlled and planned and managed and surveilled by a central government is very much antithetical to capitalism, is very much antithetical to an open market. And I just didn't know how that would ever get solved. But when Bitcoin came out, I realized like, oh, actually, here's an alternative. Here's a way for people to transact at distance digitally in the digital age without any central party and without the government being involved, without any issues of currency debasement. And so I just fell in love with it right away and have been down the rabbit hole ever since.
Got it. I heard you mention morals twice. I picked that out, so I might want to tie that back later. I tend to agree. But so, and I'd heard you say a few times, and at least what I've the interviews, that you know you're not very technical, or not like a computer engineer. So,
Right.
what was was there anything like in your career path like that, like where you're in the business world, etc., that you kind of like had a bunch of ingredients that you kind of brought to this space, or it was kind of random, or how did you get into it?
Yeah, so I've always been entrepreneurial, but because I'm not an engineer, back in 2011, you know, the vast majority of people that were into Bitcoin, it was from an engineering or cryptography angle. And so when I learned about it, I felt like there was a space to fill in helping to simplify it down and teach other people what it was without getting too arcane into the engineering. And it's one of those things where like to ride a bicycle, you don't have to understand mechanical engineering. And I think there was too much of the like explaining how the torque ratios of a chain and gears would work on a mathematical level, when all you're trying to do is get someone to understand why a bike is great. And the best way to do that is actually just get them on a bike and have them use it. And so just like trying to convey this fairly complicated system in simple terms and convey it as like, here's why this is useful to the world. That's really, I think, the niche that I found early on. And certainly the technology is so powerful that there's just an endless amount of interesting entrepreneurial opportunities there. So, so I just got really involved right away. And at first it was just a hobby, you know, that was like taking away from my responsible day job of I was doing like marketing and branding work back then. But it pretty quickly became my sole focus in my career.
And that and I'll tie this together actually a little bit, just for whatever the few thousand students that are going to watch this, right? Like I've always been intrigued when we started engaging universities. I would see like I would talk to all these people who have like been in crypto for a while. I would say like very pessimistic, right? Like maybe they have gone through like ICOs or this bad thing had happened to them. And they're just a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. And then I would get on a call with like 40, 50, 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds at like blockchain clubs at all these universities. No chip on the shoulder, right? Like it was like, it's only, they're like, I'm going to build a blockchain app, or I'm going to build an application. And like I wanted to use blockchain. Like, why shouldn't it use blockchain? Basically, not like some company stole my ETH from an ICO 2 years ago. Like,
yeah, it depends on how superficial someone's understanding of what this is about, right? So a lot of people get interested for reasons of sort of short-term profit, get rich quick, kind of like, oh, here's where money's getting made, and there's nothing wrong with that being like what interests you originally, but some people stay at that level and they're like, oh, it's kind of like a way to make money. And so they're excited when they're making money from it. And when they're not, they get pissed off and they get bitter about it and they just cast it aside. But for those who get drawn in and start to dig deeper and understand why is this valuable in the first place and why is there a reason that it will be valuable in the future, and you start going down that path and you start realizing like, oh, this is a profound technology that changes the entire economic relationship between mankind. You know, at some point, whether the price went up that day or not becomes a little less important than the fact that you're living through a transformative time in human history. And so that the people who find that part of this, I think, stick through the ups and downs. And certainly I've seen plenty of them at this point.
Well, and to that, so I'll ask you, like, and a lot of great points, but like, so what was the first thing that drew you? Like, what was the first work or what like value added work? And like, where did you really think first, okay, if I'm going to help this space, if I have philosophical alignment with it, or I believe in like maybe the moralistic aspects of it, what shovel, what axe am I going to pick up?
Yeah.
Right. That's not this.
At first, I just started writing about it. So I had a blog and I was writing a lot about it, certainly from a libertarian perspective and from a monetary economics perspective. And that kind of got me known enough to where I started meeting people in the industry. I went to the first Bitcoin conference ever, which was August of 2011 in New York City. There were 50 people there from all over the world. I think there were 2 women. One of whom was my girlfriend. and so then, you know, when it's that small, you just start meeting people. And you know, I was playing around with a few projects that might be interesting to get running. I got put in touch with Charlie Shrem, who was starting BitInstant back then in New York. And around then is when I started Satoshi Dice as well, which was the early Bitcoin gambling site. And so it was, the hard part was like trying to focus because there were just so many opportunities and so many things that needed to be built. But those were kind of the early projects that I was in.
Got it. And I want to kind of pivot off of this a little bit, but I'll wrap up here. So do you find that your skill sets were in kind of like the ideation of simplistic products or easy to use products that had real world applications, or was it in general marketing or the business side of things, networking?
I think my expertise is in branding, in communication, particularly in writing and in copy editing of a project, and just in entrepreneurialism and in trying to find things that are simple and valuable. And so this is how Satoshi Dice got started. It was just like simple branding, clearly explaining something, and just kind of like conveying an essence of something that people wanted to do, and then using the Bitcoin technology to do that in a better way. ShapeShift, which has been my sole focus for the last 6 years, was really originated from just the desire to convert one digital asset into another in the simplest, easiest way possible. And so just turning that into a product and then finding the people who could help build it, because I certainly can't code it myself. So just like, you know, growing organically a team to solve a problem and build a service is what I love to do. And I certainly have had more failures in business than successes. But I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to just be prepared for that and just like fail over and over and over, and then you will learn and you will get better. And and occasionally you'll figure something out and succeed.
Definitely. So let me kind of tie like Satoshi Dice and ShapeShift together a little bit. I'm from Las Vegas, so I love all things gambling. Not love, but
Yeah.
and I go ahead.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think there's like major trends in tech always, right? It's like Department of Defense picks it up, porn picks it up, gambling picks it up, right? And I think even today, if you look at some of the, we kind of know the applications that are used in blockchain, right? We know some currencies work. We know a variety of financial products that kind of support those. I think blockchain has still yet to be proven, you know, not for maybe lack of trying, but I think a lot of lack of execution and, like you're saying, simplicity. But I think gambling is an easy enough bridge, right? Where it's a game, it's using the aspects of this.
Yeah, well, the reason that Satoshi Dice was cool was because it used Bitcoin's blockchain and the technology there to prove that the odds were what I said they were. Mathematically, you could actually calculate what the odds of the rolls were, and you could prove mathematically that the result of your bet was what it should have been. So it had this concept called provable fairness. And that was like unheard of, right? You go to a casino in Vegas, first of all, it won't tell you what the odds are. And even if it did, you wouldn't know that that was not lying to you, right? So you're just totally blind into what you're actually playing. And the Bitcoin blockchain solved that in a really cool way. And not only that, but because it's this international payment system that can't be stopped, you know, this was just a couple of years after the poker sites all got shut down in the US. And there were so many problems with payment to and from a gambling site. Bitcoin just completely demolished that problem because anyone in the world could send a payment from anywhere to anyone else with no one even able to stop it. And it didn't matter what jurisdiction you were in. It was fast. It was reliable. And so Satoshi Dice just demonstrated both the fairness and the transparency of blockchains in finance and how valuable that can be, and just the power of being able to move money anywhere instantly at near zero cost and have no one be able to stop it or even really know that it's going on.
And then if you get really good, you might even build it. Then you like end up with a good UI, and now you can start to build games around things, right? So it's kind of like a bit of a holy grail of tech, I think, in blockchain applications.
Yeah, it's just and the industry is still just figuring out things that can be done with this stuff. So it's just like this continual motion of innovation and discovery that'll, I think, go on for another decade at least.
Well, and I was gonna kind of try to bring together. So, like, to say that one thing I know about the gaming aspect, and you just hit it on the head, right? Like money transferring and things like this, right? Where there was like a lot of, whether it's lobbyists or like people with other interests that want to stop online gaming, right? Like the Vegas, Macaus, or Atlantic cities of the world. You know, I think there was definitely some legislation and litigation going on around online gambling. And I think also, you know, kind of preempted a little bit, like I think even some of the story, you know, what I understand of like what ShapeShift went through, I think, right, even KYC, AML. How has your experience been kind of in the middle of emerging crypto companies that kind of are pushing the barriers of what laws are, or in my opinion, even more dangerous, what laws aren't, or in a real gray area that scares people just enough to not take the leap, right? For fear of retroactive issues.
Yeah, it's a huge deal. Essentially what cryptocurrencies do and what blockchains do is they give people irrefutable power to interact economically with each other. Close to anonymously if you know what you're doing, but at least fairly privately and in a way that can't be stopped. And so you give this just tremendous power to people, to everyone in the world, and that very quickly crashes right into politicians and governments that have all these rules and laws on things they do or don't want you to do, or are okay with you doing if it's done in a certain way or with a certain permission slip from a certain politician. And so certainly like the tension there and the conflict is going to be inevitable because people want to interact freely with each other. The government doesn't want them to do that. Now they have a tool to do it. And it's just going to be this like drama that unfolds over many years. So not every activity in every company in crypto is not something that is legally controversial or legally sensitive, but many are, and many of them are basically charting a course in very much gray area, where things like jurisdiction become actually quite hard to figure out, where things like what is a financial transaction is not actually clear anymore. The boundaries between speech and finance become blurred. This tool is just, these tools that are getting built are just so powerful that it allows people to get around or through many different rules. And I think that's a beautiful thing. It frees people up to build and create. And it's certainly a messy process, and there's certainly danger to it. And there's certainly tons of scammers and problems and catastrophes. But that process of innovation is really important, I think, for just the spirit of humanity. And so crypto allows that to flourish in a way that I have not seen in many other ways. I think the internet itself has a kind of a similar phenomenon to it.
They want you to forget about the scams going on Wall Street that they've glazed over forever, as if a scam is the only metric.
Yeah, and well, forget about Wall Street. The biggest scam of all time, of all of human history, is fiat currency itself, and this system in which a certain privileged group is able to create out of thin air the money that people are forced to use, and through the debasement of that money, profit from it, while everyone else's prices rise over time and their money loses value. The way to think about that.
Are they playing with that more now? I mean, like if you go back to March,
yeah,
markets dropping, like
it gets worse and worse, but it's been done throughout history. Debasement of currency is something that governments always end up doing, and generally once they start doing it, it gets worse and worse until their currency falls apart and collapses. This has happened many times throughout history. It seems to be the inevitable fate of fiat currency because politicians can't help themselves. And the reason they can't help themselves is because the populace wants stuff, always more stuff. And the government can tax, the government can borrow, but if it only taxes and borrows, then it's only able to provide that much stuff to the populace. And they always want more stuff. So there's always an incentive to go beyond what you can tax and what you can borrow. And the easiest way to do that is to simply print money. You print money, and then now you can give stuff to people. And it'll feel really good to the people getting the stuff. And the damage that it causes is unseen, is dispersed, and happens slowly over time. And most people are completely unaware of it. And so most people know that like prices go up. The price of milk has gone up X amount over the last 30 years. Most people think that that's because milk prices just go up, and they think maybe the companies are getting greedier or something. But what they don't realize is that the price is just going up because the money you're using is getting debased. You're just getting stolen from. So any money that you're holding is just losing value. And if someone had 2 or 3 or 4% of their money in their bank account just taken out each year, called like an inflation tax, they'd be very aware of it, and they'd be like, oh, what the hell is this? But instead of the money leaving the account, the value of the money just goes down by that amount, and very few people are wise to it. So when I say it's the biggest scam of all history, that's what I'm talking about. Every government does it. It's been done for centuries, and it is trillions of dollars per year of economic damage and theft. And so for the people that support that system to then come into the crypto world and say, hey, you guys are a bunch of scammers, is disingenuous at best. And you can see here this conflict between a transparent system of sound money and a corrupted system of fiat currency that's managed by politicians. And that's really like what the battle of cryptocurrency is all about.
Agree with a lot of what you said, and a lot to unpack there. I want to take this one point. I actually want to tie a few things that you just said together. But I want to go back to kind of like the regulation side, and it's my guess that you've probably been dealing with regulators for a while, and I guess like my question generally is like, A, I'm assuming that sucks. B, I would say, like, I've done it, you know, I've had to fund the Perkins Coie and the Coolies of the world, right? Like stupid bills that I don't like, that I regret, but like just out of fear sometimes. So like, did you anticipate when you first got into this world, the crypto world, that would become part of your, you know, call it like legacy or journey? And after going through that, like, where do you kind of think it's at now? Like, do you think it's at like a pretty clear point, or much rockier roads ahead, or less?
Yeah, it's definitely not at a clear point. Again, crypto blurs so many lines that the regulatory contours are not clear in many places. I absolutely knew that this was going to be what life would be like getting into cryptocurrency, because if you're doing anything interesting in crypto, you're going to start crossing some lines.
All right. So then you knew that and you accepted it, and then you're thinking, I'll burn on this cross because I care for this, or like I'll get through it and I'll win.
More like this is my form of activism, like building an alternative financial system. I think is the most fulfilling way to actually fight against a corrupted financial system. I don't vote in elections. I don't care about these stupid politicians, and I don't think any of them are really helpful or worthy of ruling others. But what I can do is build an alternative and help bring people to it. And so that's my form of activism. And some of that is entrepreneurial, some of that is business and economics, some of that is just communication with people and working together, and some of it is just an ideological activism that is something I find fulfilling. And I know a lot of people in the cryptocurrency world share that view, but certainly not everyone. You know, there's people in this industry that are just here to make money, and as long as they're doing that in an honest way, I have no problem with that either. But it's a big tent. You know, a lot of people see what they want in crypto, and when I look into it, I see a future in which money is sound, and humanity has a financial system that's built on a foundation of honesty.
I mean, I can't argue with any of that. I think that's a great message. I tend to agree to pretty much all of it. Was there a point where it almost broke you, where you were like, man, like during like the height of the ShapeShift stuff, that you're just like, it's not worth it?
Yeah, there's been some dark times, and I mean, when those happen, the thing I try to look at is like, there have been far braver people that have risked way more than I have ever risked to fight for things that they cared about. So whatever struggle I'm dealing with, whatever losses I'm suffering, whatever brain damage I'm dealing with, it's nothing compared to what some of the people in the past have done. So to just like keep that perspective, you know, I live a comfortable life, and if I can't at least take some risk and fight some fights and endure and struggle through some difficult things to help the industry grow, then, you know, what am I doing?
For all of you students listening to this right now, take note as you start to think about your next job, or whether to go work at Google or Apple, or how to explain to grandma on Thanksgiving that you're working in Bitcoin. And she asks you, she says that she heard it's for drug dealers. Just remember that there's many people behind the scenes here that are.
Fortunately, that doesn't happen quite as often. Like 2012,
yeah,
2013,
it's almost gone.
Yeah, if you brought a Bitcoin, someone would be like, "Oh, that's for buying drugs," if they had heard of it at all. And at this point, almost everyone's heard of it, and most people don't bring up drugs when you start talking about it. So it is slowly creeping into society as like, oh, actually, this is just part of how the world works now.
Yeah, well, and I'll add to one caveat to that. It depends on what country you're in. That's what I've been learning through various universities.
Yeah, probably.
I bought a site last year for fun. Everyone thought I was crazy. I just did like Bitcoin for Christmas, just literally to like teach grandma how to like give away Bitcoin, like how to answer questions at the dinner table. But so I want to kind of bring a few things together that you've been talking about. So I think, I guess, and I'll go on for just a minute here and say, I've always been intrigued by what I thought. You know, I grew up, like, as I mentioned, I grew up in Las Vegas, right? So I saw the real estate market hit there like worse than almost any other place in the U.S. I was 21 at the time. I had my first company, and it was like doing these massive home automation systems, and and watching all these real estate prices crash. So I kind of saw the world burn right in front of my eyes when I was young. Never forgot that. And then I think realizing later that Bitcoin kind of came around that same time, right? And then I think what the world's going through right now, and I think the big market crash, Bitcoin crash, right, just a few months ago, and then kind of with a massive resurgence in DeFi, I think how do you kind of draw those parallels to where the world is now? And I'll add one other caveat there. Like, I think when we talk about like fairness and, you know, kind of stacking the decks against people, you know, one of the things that always irked me, and after Vegas, I lived in Silicon Valley for a decade, so I kind of learned that tech VC world, right? And like always seeing like accredited investor aspects, for example, always used to irk me because it's like it doesn't add up essentially. Like only if you're rich you get to buy into this really world-class investment to like compound how rich you are. But if you're not rich enough, you don't get to play, right? It's almost like an IQ test. Like if you have this much money, you're aware of how you can spend your money. But if you're off by $1, so like, do you think that partially this is people acting out a little bit, that like they feel like they can quote unquote invest in things to a certain extent and like they want to take that risk?
Yeah, I mean, everyone likes to invest in something and make a bunch of money quickly, right? Like that's kind of a universal thing. The place where you can make super asymmetric bets and make, you know, 100x returns really only exists in the super high risk early stage of a project. And generally that is the realm for, you know, for angel investors and VCs, you know, millionaires that have made a bunch of money already, and they are permitted to invest in those kind of things by the SEC. And that sucks. I mean, you know, the public generally, when their first ability to get into stocks is at IPO levels, where the company is already, you know, $1 billion company. Most of its fast growth already happened, and definitely it's a safer bet at that point once it IPOs. But that should be up to the individual, right? Like whatever you want to do with your money, if you're not hurting people, that should be your call. And you're going to wreck yourself sometimes, and that will teach you. And that's how people learn. I've certainly lost money on lots of bets, and I went into it with eyes open, and it teaches me as well. And so this notion that people should be protected from themselves when they have shown no sign that they can't make these decisions, right? They're not like clinically insane or something. That's just to me, that seems very antithetical to an open market, to the principles of what, you know, America is supposed to be about, at least. And crypto comes along and is basically like, well, we're just going to do it anyway. We're going to build all sorts of things. It's going to move so fast and in so many directions and in so many strange ways that no one's going to be able to keep up with it. And have at it. And so you get this incredible explosion of innovation. And with that innovation comes a lot of crap, right? And this is important too. Wherever there is fast growth, you'll get scammers arriving, and you'll get idiots arriving who come up with stupid ideas that are bound to fail. And so the noise gets loud, and a lot of people get distracted by that. They get led down the paths that are bad. But that's part of the process. And if you don't want to be involved in that kind of risk, then just stay out. You know, anyone has that ability. So yeah, I never condone scams, obviously. And if someone is scamming people, like actually defrauding others, you know, that should be a crime, and there should be some kind of punishment for that. But if you're just creating projects and you want others to invest in those projects, that should be between you and those investors, period. End of story.
Got it. So what do you think is going on right now? I mean, like, do you think that there's like a renewed like hype in the space? I mean, it seems like the last 3 or 4 months, I mean, it's like there's some kind of marketing that was like DeFi, and then like
it's been pretty crazy to watch. So yeah, Bitcoin has gone through several of these big speculative bubbles, 3 or 4 since I've been involved, and they're 1 to 4 years in length. So it's kind of like a long wave kind of process. And within those bubbles, there are various other chapters and narratives and things that people get excited about. In the 2017 bubble, which was the last big one, it was these ICOs, basically the ability of a project to create a token and sell those tokens, and they would raise crazy amounts of money, 20 million, 50 million. Some of them raised over $1 billion. And then they used that money to build a project, or some of them were just total scams and they ran away with the money. But that phenomenon of essentially crowdfunding with no friction into projects that had massive potential and immediate liquidity, because these tokens trade right away. So unlike a normal startup, when you invest in it and it's illiquid for 5 years, and maybe someday you can sell it at an IPO or something, these tokens are liquid. So you can buy something, and then 2 months later, if you're not into the project anymore, you can sell it, which is really, really useful. And so that just exploded. So that was the 2017 bubble. And the thing about bubbles is that they fall apart, they pop and they crash, and then a bunch of the noise gets kind of washed away again. And we're definitely not in a new Bitcoin bubble yet, but I think next year we will be. I think we're getting like back into the bull phase again. And in the meantime, there's this DeFi phenomenon, which is essentially these composable financial services, mostly built on Ethereum, because Ethereum has smart contracts that you can program entire applications on the blockchain, whereas Bitcoin is more simple and is for like simple transactions of one person to another, which makes it better in some ways as a form of money, because since it's more simple, it's not as risky, not as many things can go wrong. But in Ethereum, they've taken this approach of let anyone do anything and build all these crazy complex contracts. So you have all this experimentation happening in DeFi. Again, a lot of it is really noisy, and a lot of it is kind of scammy, and a lot of it is going to crash and go to zero. But some of it is really, really innovative and really profound. So, it's something that if people are going to learn about, they need to dedicate time to learning about it. It means diving deep into it, not just reading 3 articles and going and YOLOing into some latest trend, because that's a horrible way to do it. So yeah, there's a lot of stake there and a lot of sizzle, and it's hard even for the people that are in the industry to know which is which all the time.
So what excites you then? I guess are there like specific products, and I think like when I even started looking at it, like I was busy, like you're saying, like the last few months, I was watching it, and like people are telling me about it, and I'm like, man, like if one more person like comes into the office and is like, dude, are you and I'm just gonna like turn around and snap, like, right? So it's like I think to break it down, and I just pulled some notes, right? So I think there's lending and borrowing. I think you could say stable coins are part of it, DEXs, derivatives, margin trading, insurance, oracles. What parts of that to kind of distill down DeFi? Because I think it's from a messaging standpoint, I think that's probably what people are doing wrong right now. They just made it acceptable to say DeFi, and it's like people just kind of their eyes glaze over. Like, what do you think of it as? Like, if you make it tangible?
Yeah. So it's one of those loose terms that like can mean a number of things, and that's why it's a little problematic. Like it stands for decentralized finance.
That's why this one is dangerous in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like I've seen projects that have been dead for 1.5 years, just like, oh, all of a sudden their token's going crazy because now they have some staking or some.
Yeah, it's exactly the total same phenomenon as the .com boom, right? When everyone could just add .com to their name and they were like 10x the value.
Well, I think it's the same as blockchain a little bit too. Like everyone started calling their projects blockchain in 20. So I see some similarities, but anyways.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, basically what it means, decentralized finance, the most broad definition includes, I would say, all of digital assets, all cryptocurrencies, right? Like Bitcoin was really the first DeFi project. But when people use it colloquially, they're talking more specifically about more recent projects, almost entirely built on Ethereum, which are largely oriented around these money market and lending markets where people can basically stake an asset and receive another asset because it's collateralized by the first. There are, as you mentioned, stable coins where people can basically have a cryptocurrency that is stable with dollars, and there's various mechanisms that allow that to happen. And when you have stable coins, you can lend those out. Other people who want to go long on a certain other cryptocurrency might borrow your stable coin to go long on that asset, and they will pay you interest on it. So you start getting these like complex cycles of money flows, some of which are very legitimate, some of which are kind of smoke and mirrors. And now it's gotten pretty ridiculous to the point where people create these projects basically named after foods. And like yams is the great one. Yams was really like the point where I started realizing like, okay, a lot of this is total nonsense. Basically with yams, you buy the yams and then you put them in a pool of liquidity, and then you earn more interest in yams on that. But the yams there's no reason to have the yams. The only reason to have the yams is to have more yams, because you get paid more yams on your yams. So
that sounds like a utility token.
Well, without
or sorry, the opposite of a utility token, non-utility.
So some people were buying this, like recognizing that it's kind of like a Ponzi game type situation where like if you get in early, you can make a bunch of money, and if you get out in time, you're good. And so it kind of had that game feel to it, but some people were also taking it very seriously, and they're like, oh no, yams are the future, and it's this like new way of doing things. So that's one of the projects that I just stayed the hell away from, and is very stupid. And there's even more ridiculous ones that have come out. So it's this big mix of like legitimate decentralized financial innovation of these pieces that can do all sorts of things that traditional finance does, but doing it in a decentralized way, which can be more transparent and borderless, and is really profound, combined with like all this nonsense of yams and, you know, like smoke and mirrors and just incentive schemes that don't have anything underneath them. And that's why when there are people that like say DeFi is the future, and they're right, and there are people that say DeFi is a scam, and they're right, and like it's a complex thing that people need to just.
I mean, I get irritated when I hear it, because when I hear DeFi is the future, I mean, I essentially hear cryptocurrencies with smart contracts that execute on specific parameters. That is the future. And then I'm just going back and like, isn't that what we've been talking about for like 3 years? Like, is this an innovation? Like, sorry if I missed something. Like, but I think sometimes the marketing is the innovation, right? Like I told, you know, I've been in startups my whole life, right? And I look at people sometimes and I say, even if there's a moment where somebody might be better than me, or I might be better than someone else, if no one knows my product exists, then it's pointless, right? And sometimes I think, whether we like it or not, or whether it is the butt end of memes or whatever, like, you know, those things that kind of spark interest, I guess, depending on how they're employed or to what risk it can add value. But hey, and let me sneak this in real quick. But so one of the first applications I ever used in blockchain was ShapeShift, right? To convert a coin. This was years ago. So I feel like to a certain extent, you've kind of actually been in the center of this for a long time, right? Like, I need to make like some NWA thing, like, don't call it DeFi. Like you probably could have called ShapeShift a form of DeFi.
Well, one of my big sad regrets. So we created this thing called Prism back in 2016 and 17. It was built on Ethereum using smart contracts, and it was basically a way of creating a synthetic portfolio of different assets, where you don't have to own the underlying assets, you just own exposure to a basket of different things. It was really cool, very innovative, and it was sort of a side project that we built and launched to like kind of start testing and using in the real world. And ultimately, it wasn't our main focus, and there was too much regulatory uncertainty about how it would be treated. And so we decided like we just can't spend millions of dollars in legal bills like figuring out if this side project can be workable. So we sunset it, and that would have like blown up in the DeFi world, right? Like if we had just like kept developing that for the next 2 years, that would have been $1 billion project, no question. But we shut it down 2 years early because we were worried about how regulators would look at it, and we didn't want to spend the time and the resources to struggle through that. And so that just sucks. And like for every example like that of mine, I know there are tons of other entrepreneurs that didn't move forward with a project because they were too worried about the legal expenses or getting thrown in a cage because they innovated in the wrong way. If you think about just like the damage that does to an economy, it's unseen damage. That what doesn't come to be is never seen or appreciated or counted. And these regulators, they look at themselves as like protecting the public. And whenever they go after a scam and find the person, they'll pat themselves on the back and cool, okay, go after those scams. But they chill and they scare the industry into not pushing forward projects or moving it more slowly or spending more on lawyers than they would on engineering or customer support or anything that would be useful to the customer. So that just sucks. And I'm a little bitter about it, as you can tell.
Yeah. Send me the code. I'll have the devs work on it some more. No, but I actually 100% agree with you. And like, I hadn't seen it to the extent until I got into the crypto space, right? And I mentioned earlier, like big law firms, hundreds of thousands of dollars bills, right? Like projects we passed on as an accelerator, right? Where it's just like, I think especially like 2018, 2019, living in gray areas is almost better for regulators, right? Because you don't have to act. And then people in turn, if you scare them enough, they don't act because of uncertainty that they're right. Like people are doing things based on hypotheticals, and it's kind of the opposite of what the law should be, especially if you can go back retroactively, I think, right? And kind of go after people. But let's talk about something which I think you would consider not scam, but I want to dig in a bit more. So where is ShapeShift's role in this? Like, what are you guys doing really well today? What do you guys have on the horizon? And how do you guys think you fit into that DeFi future?
Yes, so original ShapeShift was a way to convert one asset into another. There was no accounts, and basically it was just an easier, simpler way to do a simple kind of one-to-one trade of an asset. In 2018, we just came to the conclusion after millions of dollars in legal expenses that we could not offer that service without having KYC'd accounts anymore, which was really devastating emotionally to me and the team. It was horrible for our customers, has suffocated the business ever since. But since then, the company had been working on essentially a self-custody crypto platform where people could hold their assets, they could do their trades, they could send and receive like a normal wallet, they could track the value of their portfolio over time. They could do sort of all of the things that you might do at a Coinbase, but doing it in a self-custody way where someone is retaining control of their own keys. And that's really been like the core of what we believe in. I'm worried about the industry moving too far into a centralized side where everyone's crypto is just held by, a bunch of new PayPals. That will end up looking not so different than the financial world before crypto. So I think self-custody is really important, but I also recognize that people want it to be easy and safe and approachable. So that's what ShapeShift's been trying to do, is make self-custody easy for people and to help act as a counterbalance against that force of centralization. So right now people can use ShapeShift, on web or on mobile to hold all their crypto assets. They can trade. And basically it's just a way to hold and manage and interact with your crypto. So we, in terms of DeFi, we're definitely going to be integrating some of those protocols into ShapeShift. And the challenging part right now is figuring out like which one to do when, because every day I wake up and there's something new, and it's very noisy, but that's fun and exciting.
The other day I ordered food off an app, and then I would joke with my friend. I was like, well, I got to order this, but there's no coin for it a few weeks ago. And I woke up and that's where, but I ordered that night before was like a coin. I was like, and I was texting him like, do you see this? He's like, yeah. And I think it was tacos. And then I woke up and there was a taco coin.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
You could you might be able to throw a dart at the wall. This might be a good scientific method.
Yeah. Well, and to give your listeners a sense of the scale of this stuff. So Uniswap has become the biggest decentralized exchange. And I think last month they did like $5 billion in volume, something like that, which is huge. And I think on some days they've actually been higher volume than Coinbase. They're open source, and they got copied by SushiSwap, this other project. I don't know how long it took to copy Uniswap, but it got copied and rebranded as SushiSwap. A token was added to incentivize people to move their liquidity out of Uniswap and into SushiSwap. And like $1 billion of liquidity over a week moved between one to the other, just based on this like slight tweak to the model and an incentivized token. And so like the competition among these protocols is just so cutthroat. And I think Uniswap will end up still winning that battle, because I don't think there's going to be staying power with the clone. But it gives you a sense of like, you design something right, and it might only be a month of work, and you can move billions of dollars in assets out of one thing and into another. And like just the power that's happening with this technology is really, really profound. And again, people need to be extremely careful about where they're putting their money, because it's all highly experimental.
Well, and you just reminded me of something I wanted to mention earlier, but I forgot. What I've seen that's interesting is, you know, again, I've been in Silicon Valley for a while. I've been building, I have engineers. I know how hard it is to build blockchain. It's fucking hard. We've been dealing with it for years now, and it's still not easy, right? It's like making things decentralized across a variety of applications is not simple. And so I kind of understand this part, and I understand kind of what happened in 2017. I came a little late to that, I think. But I think in 2017, it's like there was a lot of money front loaded from investors or whatever, tokens, or, you know, that was like kind of on the promise of building things. And I was sitting with someone the other day saying, what I think is kind of intriguing about what's happening right now is that there's actually almost no investment, right? Like people are launching products now without raising like $50 million, right? Like they're, at least from what I can tell,
yeah, the pendulum's starting to swing back toward raising again. But the way to think of it is like, in that bubble, so much money gets poured into the ecosystem. And then the bubble pops, a lot of that garbage goes away, the scams kind of scurry off into the darkness. But some handful of very legitimate products had raised money, and they spent years building. And so some of the stuff you're seeing now came out of being funded during that ICO boom. And now those innovations start triggering like a new set of like people getting excited about it. And a lot of companies are starting to raise money again that are in crypto. And so this will again get into a kind of crazy bubble at some point, probably next year. And that cycle will keep going.
No, definitely. I guess and I'm sure you're right. Like, obviously this innovation didn't happen overnight, right? Like it takes sweat equity or whatever, whether it's cash fueled, people are hiring engineers, or they're not sleeping and writing the code themselves. Like, definitely people put in work. I just feel like 2017 was just billions of dollars with very like some delivery, but on the scale of what should have been delivered, I would say.
Yeah, no, it's billions raised on promises.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of these promises were broken. Some of them have been met, but that's the bet. When people are buying these early projects, it's a bet of, will you deliver anything like what you're painting your vision? And most people don't. Either it's a scam or they tried earnestly but just couldn't do it. But most of that innovation never happens, and that's okay. That's part of the process.
Yeah, sure. Well, I know we're running here. I have one last question,
Sure.
or as much time as you got. But we talked about ShapeShift, and you were saying, like, obviously you guys came to the conclusion that you had to meet certain regulatory requirements, etc. You're living in Denver. I know what I've heard from you talk earlier. You had lived in Panama for a bit. Are there ever moments where you're like, if I move this out of the U.S., etc., I wouldn't deal with this? And like, how do you cope with that? Like, how do you make that decision?
If it was that easy, I wouldn't be in the U.S.
Got it.
Yeah, where the company's based has very little bearing on what regulatory obligations exist. What matters mostly is where your customers are. So you could avoid US regulations if you moved out of the US, never came back, like never visited, and had no customers in the US. If you satisfied those, then you pretty much don't need to care about US laws. But I wasn't ready to do that. I like living in the US. This is where my family and friends are. I wasn't going to go live somewhere else and just kind of like constantly be hiding from the US government. Maybe I should have, like that's something I can vet later on in my life and look back at that. But I wanted to just kind of move forward and see where these contours were. And so where I live kind of didn't matter too much.
Sure. And I think I understand like a little bit of those moving parts, right? And not to ask like too personal of a question, but I just kind of want to understand, because I'm sure you had like confronted that issue, right? Like,
Yeah, we looked at every possible way forward, and there wasn't a viable one if we were going to be trading with customers. So that's really what got us.
Well, I'll leave it with this, and I'll let you say one last thing. So for the students watching, I think it's actually been a weird year for them. I've seen it, right? Like they haven't gone back to class. Their connection to blockchain, I think at most of the universities in the world, was kind of their on-campus blockchain clubs in a lot of ways, where they kind of built friendships, etc. What would your advice be to them? Like not only sitting at home right now, or maybe not going to school, but kind of their education will have been disarray. Like if you were in school today, how would you think about blockchain? Like how would you be thinking about it?
Well, if you're at all of the engineering type, like if you're going for computer science or anything, I think the opportunity in decentralized systems and in blockchains is huge now and will continue to grow for a while. So I think if you specialize in blockchains, you're going to have zero problem getting hired by a gazillion different companies. If you're not an engineer, you should just understand this stuff. Just learn about it. Be able to speak intelligently on what the difference is between different blockchains and what the trade-offs are, and just like understand this phenomenon of the world, because I think it'll help you a lot sort of later in life. And then just play around with it, just use it, meet people that are into it, talk to them about it, and just like be familiar with it, because it is an area of growth and profound wealth creation and profound innovation. And also, maintain a healthy degree of skepticism and be really careful.
All right, kids, you heard it there first. I don't know what to think of this interview. I had a good idea, but you seem like a really good guy, to be honest. And I feel like you're trying to do some good stuff. Yeah, well, for what it's worth. I feel like you're trying to do some good stuff. I feel like you have probably a good heart. Like I said, I heard you mention morals multiple times. I know we don't know each other that well. I kind of live along the same lines. And, again, we've had a good chance to meet a lot of cool people, I think, throughout these conference processes. And for anyone that doesn't know ShapeShift, go check them out. For anyone who doesn't know about Erik, I suggest, Google him and listen to some talks from 7 years ago, right? That's what I did. I think you can get perspective that some of these opinions have weathered the storm a little bit. But Erik, thank you very much for making the time to speak with me. And any last words before we go?
No, thanks for having me on, and have a great day. Stay safe.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I don't know what point we're here in the 72 hours, but keep watching, and we have some more cool interviews coming up. Thanks, everyone.